Hello, everybody. My name is Ray. Welcome to the Evangelical Dark Web. Today, we're going to be talking about the Gospel Coalition, why they have a defeatist mentality, why they have a loser mentality, and that just bleeds into their content. And we're going to be talking about that today because they are a defeated organization. And I don't just mean by the culture at large, I also mean by this internal struggle for the church that I'm a part of, that you're a part of if you're listening to this, and that they're a part of, but on the other side. And they're defeated on all fronts. And that's what I wanted to highlight in this video. One of the recent live streams that I did was on a comparison between the Christian Post, or the Christian Compost, and the Gospel Coalition. And the comparison that I was making was that Christian Post currently is worse than the Gospel Coalition. The content that they're putting out is far worse because they are more aggressive in their content. They don't have the same loser mentality. They just have some bad people working there, for sure. But the Gospel Coalition has a loser mentality. They are defeated on all fronts, and we're going to highlight that in today's video. Now, over the weekend or late last week, it surfaced and went viral a 2021 article written by the Gospel Coalition that seems to have affirmed homosexual marriage and says that Christians, the existence of it, I should clarify, and that Christians would be wise to affirm to what two consenting adults have the right to do. Basically, the quote is saying that we should affirm people's rights to violate God's law, which is not something that Christians really believe, nor is it wise. But let's actually read the quote in its context. Every culture and nation must find common consent in public ethics, specifically what is prohibited, permitted, and promoted for the common good. True toleration must include living peaceably with deep differences. Most Western nations have extended marital status to arrangements other than heterosexual monogamy. The wise Christian will affirm the legal right of consenting adults to order their lives without fear, yet that right doesn't entail affirming the goodness of these arrangements. Believers can be good neighbors to all while diverging on some moral issues. This is the heart of a peaceful and pluralistic society. So this is, again, a very loser mentality in an article that maybe I should have caught this, because I probably read this article in 2021. I probably read this article last year and chose not to report on its findings. And perhaps, maybe still, I wouldn't have reported on its findings alone, because I'm not reporting on the contents of this article in and of themselves. I am bringing up in a larger context because this is a 2021 article, and one of the arguments that I have made is that in 2022 the Gospel Coalition is a defeated organization. They are burying their controversial opinions in long-form content. They are not aggressively tackling cultural issues anymore. They're basically reducing it down to cringe movie reviews that they try to shoehorn in some sort of bad theological take into, like calling Bruno from Encanto a Christological figure. That is a very horrendous take. Blasphemous, almost. Or maybe it is. But that is what the Gospel Coalition is really reduced to. Other than that, most of their content is banal. It's trite. It's really not adding any major substance in the spiritual warfare that we're in at large. So the Gospel Coalition, very much a defeated organization. Cannot stress that enough, because people are going crazy over an article that's over a year old. Not even a current bad take by the Gospel Coalition. And speaking of only over a year old, we're going to see some more of this loser mentality from their last year's Gospel Coalition conference. And it has a panel where you see Brett McCracken, Sam Albury, and Trevin Wax in order from left to right here. And Sam Albury Brett McCracken is like a Gospel Coalition staffer. He's like one of their higher ups, not the editor in chief. I believe that's Colin Hansen. Sam Albury is the founder of a very pro-homosexual organization over in the UK. He's kind of brought a lot of that mentality here in the US. Trevin Wax is another Big Eva type, young, up-and-coming Big Eva author, and he has gone downhill a lot over the last 2 years with his takes. So just a picture of who these people are, and their conversation is just so defeatist. We're going to listen to this at 1.3 speed and only about 7.5 minutes of it.
Yeah, I think maybe just to get started, we can talk about the big picture of like the culture and where we're at, because I do think even in the last few months, we've entered maybe a new era in the U.S. with regard to sexuality, and the Equality Act. Many of you have probably heard about that. It's looking like I think it's already passed in the Senate, or in the House, and it's being voted on in the Senate. There's the Assistant Secretary of Health in the U.S. is a transgender woman, Rachel Levine, so that's a first. And it's interesting that a transgender woman is kind of in charge of health, public health, which says a lot about where we're at as a culture.
Okay, so let's pause right there. They're using enemy language off the bat. Like, we're 4 minutes in, we barely have like an introduction of everyone who's actually on the panel, and one of the first issues that he brings up, Brett McCracken brings up, is using their language. No, it's a man. It's a dude in a dress. We call those transvestites. That's what that dude is. There's nothing else to it. Stop using their language. And step one, you've already failed to talk about the issue correctly. And this is supposed to be a panel discussion, and they can't even get their language right. They're already ceding so much territory here.
And I came across this Gallup survey, which was really just startling, that 1 in 10, 9.1% of millennials now identify as LGBTQ, and for Gen Z, it's up to 16%. 1 in 6 identify as LGBTQ, and that, I don't know what the stats were 10 years ago, but they were significantly lower than that. So
this is because of grooming. I just want to be clear. This is not a natural phenomenon. This is an unnatural phenomenon. This is a conditioned phenomenon. See how I can talk about this straightforward?
This rapid progression happening. So I just want to ask you guys, just to start, where do you see this going in the next 5 to 10 years, and how can Christians prepare? What should we be talking about, thinking about? Just any initial thoughts from you guys. And I will also say we were supposed to have our good friend Rebecca McLaughlin on this panel. She had to go home a bit early. Her plans were sadly had to change, so we missed her perspective. Check out her books and her articles, though, because she's a great voice on this. But
not really. Rebecca McLaughlin, to her credit, did repent of opposing reparative therapy. And a much older Gospel Coalition article than the ones we've discussed tonight. I say tonight because I'm recording this at 3 in the morning. So, bad take again, but that's just a company man sticking up for another company employee, so to speak. Bad take again.
It's great to be with you too. So, anyone want to say anything?
I'll have a go. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. In terms of where we're going, back in 2016, I remember thinking, okay, I think this is where things are going to go, and I was completely wrong. And so I'm sort of now nervous of making predictions. One of the things I'm beginning to see is, I think Western culture, I'm thinking largely US and UK where I'm from, things are moving quickly, but in more than one direction at the same time. And so whilst there is the very trend you just mentioned, I'm also seeing at the same time something of a fairly
love the use of the word whilst
reaction to that very trend as well. We're seeing more indications of anti-trans kind of things, anti-LGBT as a general type things. I think we're going to see more of an ugly response to the trend that you've mentioned alongside the...
How is that a bad thing? At all? How is that a bad thing?
Trend itself continuing. And I think one of the challenges that will give us as Christians is how do we not be with those guys without looking like we're with these ones, and making sure that our own questions, concerns, disagreements are not seen to be siding with what I think is going to be a very aggressive and godless reaction to those things. So being willing to critique both of those trends as we see them. So that may make life a little bit lonelier, actually, because I think each side is going to assume if you're not fully with us, you must be with the others.
Yeah.
So we'll get caught in the middle, I think, and I think we're just going to have to live with that.
Third wayism. This is third wayism. Both sides are wrong. We can just split it down the middle because Jesus wasn't on the side of the Pharisees or the Sadducees. It's just weak, effeminate content that this Gospel Coalition's putting out, and considering who Sam Albury is, his background of basically promoting a lot of side B theology, and a lot of Revoice inspiration as well. Tim Keller also has Revoice inspiration, evidently, according to some of the Revoice people. But just looking at the background, of the context of who he is and what he's saying, he's trying to split the baby on this issue, and you just can't do that. They're going to paint you as anti this or a phobe or an ist. They're going to do that anyway. You might as well just learn not to be offended by it now and then just speak freely now and later. That's what the Christians should be doing.
I'm like Sam. I'm always a little skeptical when anyone says exactly how things are going to play out in the next 5 to 10 years, because there really is no inevitable trend toward anything if you believe in a sovereign God who upsets and upends trends all the time. So some of the signs that Sam is talking about where there's been something of a backlash when it comes to with the transgender subject in particular, those theories require an ontological shift, an actual shift in its overall cosmology, which the whole LGBTQ conversation requires that as well. If we're discussing marriage and other things, if you can see it back there, it's actually a different cosmology that's at root. But the transgender one is one that feels immediately more costly to ordinary people. So the question about women's sports, for example, and things like, I think there will be a lot of conversation about that in the next few years. And like Sam said, some of it is not going to, it's going to be a worldly pushback, so there won't be the fragrance of Christ with that. And I think that's one of the areas where Christians will need to stand out, both from the LGBTQ push, but as well from some of that backlash will not be the way that Christ would have responded. So that's a...
You see, you can't ban dudes from women's sports because that might not be Christ-like. How about Christians lead on these issues instead of letting subverters like a J.K. Rowling, so to speak for us on these issues, or even worse, a Dave Rubin? We need to be speaking on these issues. It's the same thing as, with the life issue. The Christians need to be leading the charge, because if we don't, and when we don't, you get referendums like the one they had in Kansas. You get weak people like Brent Leatherwood and a lot of these National Right to Life folks. You get weak leaders when Christians, and I'm going to raise the stakes here, Christian men aren't leading on these issues. Instead, I actually am not going to say that we're not leading on the issue of women's sports particularly. I think Christians are doing well at that because of the number of states that have banned men and women's sports. And at the behest, we had to oppose an effeminate, Christ-claiming, gay-affirming governor in Asa Hutchinson. They had to override him in Arkansas on this issue. So... And then Kristi Noem in South Dakota was initially against us, but now she had to fall in line because conservatives and Christians led on this issue. Better late than never, for sure, because a man like Mike Pence wasn't going to do it. So that's the type of, if we're not doing it, if they view whether it's Christ-led as whether it's this third mushy way that they're going to presuppose. This is such a loser mentality. You can't split the baby on this. You got to embrace the fact that it's becoming a national polarizing issue, because that's a good thing. if it's not like that, if it stops being a national polarizing issue, that means we've lost on this issue. And you're starting to see that with homosexual marriage, where the Republicans are completely selling out on us on this issue, despite the fact that the 2016 Republican platform is quite strong on this issue. They're selling out. They're selling out. You can't let them sell out. It needs to be a polarizing issue at the minimum, and then it needs to be maybe agreeable for the other side. Not on our side. This is a steel cage match. There is a winner and there is a loser in this fight. We cannot be the losers, and we cannot negotiate with this evil. That's what they're trying to do. That is what Trevin Wax wants. That is what Sam Alberry has also articulated.
That is something for sure that I think we will be wrestling with. But the bigger issues that we face as a society and we face in our churches, I think, is that because of this shift at the worldview level cosmologically, we are going to have to start way back in our discussions in our discipleship efforts. We should just go ahead and expect that the young people growing up in our churches will not know why we believe what we believe about marriage, about sexuality. It is unlikely to make sense and for there to be a plausibility around it because of the new environment that you're seeing with some of those polls, the sort of sexual fluidity. And we can point out the incoherence and the inconsistency all day long in the sexual revolution. It's all over the place. I mean, if you really look for it, and we could get into that a little bit later maybe in the conversation, but people live with incoherence and inconsistencies in their worldview all the time. So just pointing those out won't necessarily change minds. But I think from a discipleship standpoint, it's going to be really important for us to do two things: to assume and not be surprised when young people growing up in our congregations and in our families have questions and don't understand exactly where we're even coming from as we present a biblical worldview. But then secondly, helping our own kids navigate, how do I respond to people who have fundamental, irreconcilable differences with that perspective, and what it's going to look like for them to hold to that perspective in a world that's increasingly hostile to that view.
Okay, so we're nearly at the end of the clip that I wanted to show you. But again, loser mentality. So let's just kind of break down some of what he's talked about. He said that a high percentage of young people are going to be struggling. He said, and specifically what he was talking about was people growing up in the church. So people growing up in the church don't know what the church believes. He simply he makes it seem like if the church just told them what Christianity teaches, that they would all of a sudden, okay, my objections are lowered. It's like, no, I think these kids don't agree with you. Or you're not actually discipling these children. Which one is it? Both are bad. Both are bad, but at least if the child disagrees, you did your job. You know, we're supposed to preach the gospel, not ensure that everyone is saved. That's the Holy Spirit's job. That's God's job, not our job. Our job is to carry out the Great Commission. So this is just a bad mentality. So are you discipling these kids or not? Because you're making it seem like you're not actually teaching them what the Bible says about marriage at a young age. That's on you, bro. I can assure you that when I was the age range of what he was talking about, I could tell you what the church believed on this subject. I could tell you that. Why? Because they did their jobs. So that's an indictment on the pastors in America. That's from them. That's not even from me. But that's a loser mentality. People have a job to do. If you cannot teach children in this day and age and help, if you don't have the capability, I'm not asking for a complete success rate, but if you aren't even willing to engage, you shouldn't be in ministry, especially with children.
What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I think Trevin's absolutely right about there's issues behind the issues here that need to be addressed, because I have a lot of contacts with Christian higher ed, and my wife works at a Christian college in Southern California, and just seeing the internal kind of shifts that have happened with just students today versus 10 years ago. They're just being shaped in a culture where it's unthinkable to be against, any and every sexual expression. So
that's where I wanted to leave off, because we don't need to watch the whole 47-minute conversation, because it's a very fruitless conversation. It gives you a loser mentality, and we need winning mentality here. Christ wins in the end. There's your winning mentality moment. Christ wins. And we can't be afraid of these people. The Gospel Coalition wants to negotiate with the culture. It wants to find common ground with the culture. I'm here to tell you, Christ wins in the end. Why negotiate? Why try to give away what already belongs to Christ? We don't need to do that. So that's all I got to say about that. My name's Ray. This is the Evangelical Dark Web. If you like this kind of content, like the video, subscribe to the channel. Otherwise, if you really like this kind of content, Evangelical Dark Web has a Patreon-like system built into its site at Patreon or at evangelicaldarkweb.org/join. You can become a member for as little as $5 a month. Get access to extra content, polls, stuff like that. Have a blessed day, and I will catch you on the next one.